Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Provincial HSJCC webinar. My name is Trevor Timchuk, Chair of the Communications and Knowledge Exchange Committee, and I will be your host today. This webinar will be moderated by Sophia Hussain, who is the Director of Policy at the John Howard Society of Ontario. She will introduce herself shortly. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will conclude at 1:30 p.m. We will be enabling the chat box shortly. You can leave comments in there. However, to make it easier to go through questions, we ask that you use the Q&A box. There will be a dedicated question and answer period at the end of our webinar. This webinar recording, slides, and resources will be emailed to you following the webinar. It will also be posted on the HSJCC's website and YouTube page. We will hold a few minutes at the end of the webinar for a short survey to hear your feedback from today's session. This survey will also be emailed to you following the webinar. The Human Services and Justice Coordinating Committee network is comprised of 38 local committees, 14 regional committees, and 1 provincial HSJCC. Each HSJCC is a voluntary collaboration between health and social service organizations, community mental health and addictions organizations, and partners from the justice sector, including Crown attorneys, judges, police services, and correctional service providers. Please visit our website for more information. It now gives me great pleasure to first introduce you to our moderator, Sophia Hussain.
Thanks so much, Trevor, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this third webinar in the series. I'm really pleased to be able to moderate the discussion today and really looking forward to introducing Joseph and Colin from Restorative Justice Housing Ontario. Just to begin, to introduce myself and sort of where I come at this topic, I am with the John Howard Society of Ontario. We're a provincial organization that does applied research, policy development, public education, evaluation in the criminal justice space, and housing and the issues around homelessness and involvement with the criminal legal system has been a focus of our organization for some time. We actually have released a couple reports in the recent years that go over this topic in great detail, the first of which is called No Fixed Address. And that report looked at the instance of admissions to correctional institutions in Ontario of people with no fixed address, i.e. A proxy measure for homelessness among people that are admitted to correctional institutions. And what we found is the proportion of admissions to corrections with no fixed address is increasing over time, suggesting that this is becoming more and more of an issue. The second report in that series, called Locked Up, Locked Out, outlined the experiences of people with lived experience of homelessness and incarceration or having criminal records and the barriers and experiences that they had navigating housing. And so there were some key findings that came out from that report that I think are relevant to the discussion today that I'll just quickly highlight. The first being that 40% of respondents reported experiencing stigmatization or discrimination by a landlord or housing provider due to their involvement with the criminal legal system. 43% of participants in our study cited the triple stigma associated with having a criminal record or past incarceration, homelessness, and being on social assistance as a significant barrier to housing acquisition. An increasing number of landlords are utilizing criminal record checks as part of a rental screening processes and are less likely to rent to somebody with a criminal record. And half of respondents cited lack of systems navigation and outreach as a barrier to accessing community services. Individuals often don't know what is available and where to go to access community supports. And so I think all of these sort of points highlight the need for housing that addresses the barriers that people with criminal records or past incarceration experience, and some of the ways that appropriate housing can connect people with supports. And so without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Joseph and Colin from Restorative Justice Housing Ontario, who will be able to lead us through a bit of information about the organization. And if you just bear with me for one moment, I'm going to pull up this slide deck here. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up? Can we see that okay?
Thumbs up.
Perfect. Okay, so Joseph, please feel free to take it away. Can you tell us about Restorative Justice Housing Ontario?
I can do that, but I think I'm best to start with the land acknowledgement if I can. And I'll
Yes,
take that
sorry.
one. So I'm found on the Restorative Justice Housing website. And here it is. Restorative Justice Housing acknowledges that our homes like this one, where we are right now, are situated on lands of the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wenda peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. RJHO also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Thank you. So I'll start by saying that my name is Joseph Lorem. I'm the Program Director of Restorative Justice Housing. And beside me is our longtime resident, Colin. He lives in this house here. We're located in South Etobicoke near the Mimico GO Station. It was our third house in the area. We have 3 houses in South Etobicoke, 1 in Scarborough, all near public transit because generally speaking, our residents don't have cars. So we have to access public transit. They're all located in arguably middle class, nice neighborhoods. One of the criteria I have is I look for no drugs being accessible or nearby. And it's one of the criteria because I don't want to trigger or put our residents in any sort of distress because as you probably know, Sophia, most people have some sort of issues related to drugs if they've been to prison in any way, either before prison or oftentimes, unfortunately, during their prison experience. So what restorative justice, what we do is we take houses that exist in the private marketplace that are already for rent, and we sort of repurpose them for a social good. So I'll approach a landlord and saying, your house is in the market for rent. I'd like to rent it under what we call a head lease, which I'll discuss later. And within our house, we'll put 1 formerly incarcerated person per bedroom. And the RJHO will responsible for the rent and all the utilities, everything else. And unfortunately, we won't tell you the name of the individuals that are in the house, both for their privacy reasons and oftentimes because of transitioning who's going to be in at any given time. And all I can promise you is that they've been interviewed by us and that I believe they deserve a second chance, that they're committed to reform. And my goal as a tenant with the landlord is I expect that our residents will be better than the average tenant that you've had experience with. And that's how I sell the program to them. And you can imagine it was a very difficult sell the first time we started. Right, we started in February 2020 at the start of COVID, and we had no track record, obviously. So I approached a landlord, and I had landlords yell at me, hang up the phone on me, threaten me, till finally we found one landlord who was willing to rent us half the house. So they rented us the top floor of a house, only 3 bedrooms, and they kept the basement. I suspected at the time that they kept the basement so they could spy on us, come by the house whenever they wanted. And they did that. They came by a lot in the first month, and after the first month, they met all the residents that time. They saw that the guys had kept the house cleaner than we had it. Our residents fixed things, painted things on their own initiative to make the house better than we received it. And finally, the landlord came to me and he said, you know what? You guys are better than I thought you'd be. You can have the basement for $500 extra a month, so which is well below market. So that became our first house. And that first house led to our second house, a referral. And that second landlord, they were purchasing another house. And the day of closing, they called me and they said, you've done such a great job at the other house. If you want to rent this one, we'll rent it to you before we even put it on the market. So they rented it to us, and that led to a 4th house because that person came by saw the houses, met our residents, and they were more willing to rent us the 4th house, that one being in Scarborough. Next slide, please. So it was the organization which is a nonprofit, registered nonprofit, was founded by people that have experience with the criminal justice system and with a mission to provide safe, supportive, sustainable housing to formerly incarcerated who are committed to reform and require or can benefit from the assistance of stable housing to reintegrate back in society in a positive manner. I highlight positive because when I started this job, my definition of positive was perfection. I expected the resident to do everything perfectly for me to view it as positive. So they had to get a job, they had to reconnect with family, they had to, of course, live crime-free, all these high standards. And one of our first residents, who was our first resident at our second house, he had a long criminal history, in and out of incarceration throughout his whole life, drug issues. And he moved into that house and he actually paid me the first, I believe, 4 months rent up front because he didn't want to have that money as a temptation to go buy drugs. And he moved into the house and he did a fantastic job. He totally changed his life around. He worked, he kept the house maintained. The neighbors loved him. The owners of the house loved him. And unfortunately, after a year, he fell back into his old patterns, back into meth use, and he went off the rails, and eventually he had to move on. And I was very upset about that situation and wondered, what could I have done differently to avoid this failure? Until a member of our board, when I was discussing it with him, he described it as a positive experience. And I said, like, how is this a positive experience? And he made me realize this is a person who had a history of incarceration, off and on, barely ever out for a month without being incarcerated, history of drug use. And this person lasted just over a year without any of these negative habits. And now this person knows that when they can try again in the future, they have that foundation of success where they lasted a year. So maybe next time they'll last 2 years, 3 years, or maybe the rest of their lives. And ever since that day where I saw a positive in what we were doing, I have a great day at work every day because I see positives from every one of our residents in some way, fashion. They're doing something positive to put themselves in a better situation than when they came to us. So that's how I define positive. I take people as they are, and I look what any positive change they made, and I'm happy anything that I find, and I'm generally happy all the time about what we're doing. Next slide, please. So as I'm sure Sophia will discuss in the John Howard study and referenced earlier, the rate of homelessness or maybe home difficulty for someone who's been to prison is very great. I would think it's probably even greater for people who've done time in the provincial system because they don't have the stopgap measure of the halfway houses to give them a place to decompress for a few months, maybe get a resume done, maybe get other issues. So you're basically, if you come from the prisons, the jail system, you're often just released to the streets, regardless of where that is. And we've taken in residents who just came out of Toronto South. One was a day after Christmas. Toronto South, you're out the door. They had nowhere to go but for us, without no preparation whatsoever. That's something that I think is short-sighted in the system. I noticed the word weeks is highlighted, and it relates to the first and last payment of rent. I would argue there's never been a situation where we get our rent if someone's on ODSP or ODSP, the housing allowance. We almost never get it on time. We often wait days, we wait weeks. In one case, we had a resident who was transitioning from OW to ODSP, and his housing allowance was being deducted from the money he was receiving, but we weren't getting it. And because of this issue, we had to wait 7 months to get paid our rent. No private sector landlord is going to wait maybe 7 days and 7 weeks. No one's going to wait 7 months on the assurance that the money is coming. Now, we're always going to get paid, so we're not worried about that. But I can tell you the resident was very stressed about worrying if we're going to evict him, as if we're like a regular landlord in the society. We would evict him long ago. And I said, don't worry about it. You've done everything you can. I know you're communicating. We'll let it go. And so that's something that I think the system should work on correcting, because if you want to have people transition to their own housing after prison and they're on disability benefits or Ontario Works, that type of delay is, especially in this technological age, is really something should be unacceptable. So as I alluded to, for our rent, we take whatever the housing allowance someone receives, whether on OW or ODSP, we take that as full payment of rent. They don't have to pay any utilities. So if they're on OW, it's $390, we take that. If they're on ODSP, it's now, I think, $582, we take that, and we cover all the difference. So we cover what we collect from the residents, and then what we have to pay to our own landlord plus utilities. That difference, that spread, is what RJHO puts out of pocket, and the money we get is entirely donor finance. We don't, other than this indirect payments through government through housing allowance, we get no direct funding from government whatsoever. The point I want to highlight in the corner is the Human Rights Code. In Ontario, some may not believe this, you are legally able to discriminate against someone for housing, regardless of their offense, regardless of how long ago, or in our case, how committed they are to reform. It doesn't matter. When I was released, I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I should have probably qualified that earlier. When I was released from prison, I had the difficulty of thousands of Google searches against me, and I could not find a place to live for the longest time. You know, I might present well, but that compared with someone with a criminal record without one, they would always go with the person without a criminal record. Until one day, I was very fortunate. I was working part-time, and the place where I was working had an office football pool where you pick the NFL team every week. And I actually ended up co-winning that with someone else in the firm. And I took my winnings, which is about a little under $12,000, and I put my savings together. And the next landlord I saw, I said, here's the entire year's rent up front. And so they didn't have to Google me. They didn't have to do a criminal record background check. And that's how I found my first place to live after prison. All the residents we ever had can't do that. So that I was very fortunate, but you can see how it is a barrier to housing And again, even if you're committed to reform, no one cares. They can just say you had a criminal record 20 years ago, and we're not going to rent to you, as I'm sure your study showed. Next slide, please. So on this slide, the point I want to emphasize, which I think is very relevant, is that RJHO believes in second chances. We sort of exist for second chances, but it's balanced with personal accountability and effort. When someone comes in, I speak to them, I say, like, what are your goals? Like 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, maybe longer term goals. And whatever it is, I say, look, I will assist you, but you have to be the person working hardest towards this goal. I won't push you. I won't pull you. I'll be beside you. I'm a great problem solver. Whatever problem you have, I'll help you. But you have to be the driving force to improving your life. Because, I'm very candid. I said, look, I don't want to subsidize bad behavior or certainly illegal behavior through my efforts or the money of our donors. So I want you committed to reform and working towards a better place that you'll be because you were here for even a short period or even a long period of time. So I give a variation of the same kind of speech when someone moves in. I'm sure Colin heard it. And I say, look, everyone has had bad breaks in life. A lot of people have bad childhoods, had bad experiences. A lot of people have, a parole officer went out of the way to screw them over. I say that to them. But if you were honest, you were inside and you're here now because of a series of bad choices. And then I say, that's great news, actually, because you can now make a series of good choices and be in a much better place 1 year, 2 year, 4 years from now. And because of that, I'm not going to judge you on your past. I know your record. I know all about it. I don't care. I'm going to judge you from this point forward on the choices you make. And if you make good choices, to me, you're a great resident and I will help you as much as I can. If you make bad choices, then, we probably won't last. The relationship won't last long and you might have to move on. And it's an important point to make because when I've reluctantly had to evict residents, and we really are reluctant to do it, we try to work out alternatives like moving them to a different house if maybe the dynamic in one house is causing their issues. But when I do have to evict someone, I've never had a single resident resist the eviction or damage and vandalize the house on the way out or come back and cause issues to the house. They know I gave them a fair shake and I judged them on their actions and nothing beyond that. And so it's worked out very well from that standpoint. And equally, I judge them on the good choices. So you can see that it notes that a lot of our residents volunteer. So for example, it's not mandated that you must volunteer anywhere with your time. But it's encouraged or implied. So of our residents that use the food banks in the area, I encourage them to volunteer. So we have many residents volunteer at the food bank an hour or two. We had residents work 30-hour weeks at a food bank volunteering. The particular food bank here in Etobicoke, it's run out of a church. And every year this church has a community event that they sponsor to raise money for children activities in the area. And last year we had every single one of our Etobicoke residents, at that time 16, volunteered at least one of the 2 days on the weekend to this event. And we had three of our 4 residents from Scarborough came across town to volunteer to this community event, including one of them actually who walked from Scarborough to Etobicoke, who I'm talking about, because he didn't have a bus fare. And if I'd known I would have given him bus fare, I would have picked him up. But he walked from Scarborough to Etobicoke to volunteer this community event. And, you wonder, like, why is it so important to the guys to do something like this? I always see it that they're trying to redefine themselves to themselves in one level. Like, I'm not the bad person everyone says. Look, I'm doing something for the community. But also, I think they see the responsibility they have to change the perception of formerly incarcerated people to the community around them. So they're volunteering with people in the community, in the area. And I'm sure a lot of the people they're also volunteering know these people are former offenders. And yet by doing that, they might have trepidation initially, but they see how hard the person works, what they're giving with their time. And that's a slow step towards changing the perception of ex-prisoners in society. It's one of I think, RJHO's most important goals. Sure, at one level, it's to give housing to the formerly incarcerated to help them reintegrate. But one thing I take out is always, and I tell the guys, one of your main responsibilities is to change the perception of the formerly incarcerated as tenants, in our case, because that will benefit guys you don't even know 5 years, 10 years down the road who might need a place to live. And someone maybe interacted with someone with one of our houses, or maybe me or someone else, and they'll give that guy a chance because of the good work you're doing today. So next slide, please.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that last bit. I think as I was looking at this, I was going to ask you the question, whether this is something that happens organically. And I think it's so interesting that that's just what people naturally want to do. And I agree with you that it's about changing the perception of community, but also probably a little bit about self-perception as well, and like redefining, like being part of community. And I think that supports folks in their journey, I'm sure. So that's great.
So this is the RJHO model. I mentioned earlier that we started with half a house in February 2020. We've added about a house a year for the men's house. We had a women's house until very recently. We closed that down because the model that we used for the men's house, we found it didn't work for the women's house. We're going to be readdressing that, and likely the next women's house will probably be a 2-bedroom condo in a secure building, because the women ex-prisoners deal with issues of intimate partner violence, security concerns that the men don't really experience. And so that's a change of plan going forward. Another note that we say accountability. All residents, whether on parole or warrant expired, that means the end of your sentence, like Colin is right now, must commit to living crime-free and demonstrating mutual respect within the community. So my approach with the residents is a respect-based approach. When someone moves in, I am exceedingly respectful, probably to a level that they have not experienced maybe in their entire adult life, certainly not during their incarceration. And I do that because then I say, I would like you to be equally respectful toward the other residents in the house as a whole, the neighbors, the community, and me. And I think the guys take that to heart, the respect-based approach. And if anyone watching is involved in property management, I'll tell you a stat. Of the 5 years I've been doing this, and I've been doing this since the organization started, we've had, and now 4 houses for men. We have 18 men in the 4 houses. We'll have 19 shortly. All that period of time, RJHO has spent exactly $0 repairing damage done to our houses for men. $0. Of that period of time, we've only ever had 2 doors broken. The first door, the resident replaced it before I even found out about it. The second door, his girlfriend had broken the door and he replaced it, paid for a new door, replaced it. So over this long period of time, over the numerous men that have been through here, they don't damage the house. Even when they're evicted, they don't damage the house. And that's because of a respect-based approach, because they don't want to, I argue, don't disrespect the charity, myself. And again, because they take it to heart, they don't want to disrespect the opportunity given to future formerly incarcerated people that might need this chance of a house to give them a way to reintegrate back into the community. I think it's important to note the comprehensive support services we do. So one of them is trades and apprentice training. We have a relationship with Building Up, which is a charity in Toronto, where they'll provide, they deal with people who are formerly in prison and other people with issues. They'll provide them trades training for 8 weeks paid, and they'll put them on a job site, 8 weeks paid. And then if the person likes a career in trades, they will help them get into a trades union in anywhere, actually, we had outside even the GTA, and they'll pay their entry fee. So they put out a lot of money for the people. We've had residents, some of our most successful residents have come from Building Up, and I direct people to Building Up. So it's a perfect relationship where we're providing housing, they're providing employment and career futures. It's a fantastic thing that worked out for us. We do the normal stuff about ODSP, OAS registration, income tax filing, obtaining personal ID. Here's something that people might not know about prison. We've had many cases where people have come to us directly from prison with no ID beyond their prison card. And in one case, all they had was a photocopy of their prison card. You imagine you're released from prison, you maybe have $100 or $200 on you, if that, and all you have for identification is a photocopy of a prison card. Try to get other ID established, try to get a bank account, try to do anything else. And it's a short-sighted approach in the prison system. I would require before you release somebody to at least have all their ID in place. So we have a relationship with a group called Margaret's in Toronto. So they're fantastic and expert at that. So if I have someone like that, I refer them to Margaret's, and they can get the person's ID very, very quickly. So they're great. There's a BMO in the area of Etobicoke that knows our residents are formerly incarcerated. I have a relationship with the manager there, so I can bring them to set up a bank account much faster than if a person can do it otherwise. And of course, what we provide volunteer opportunities and job placement. I've placed people in jobs. I'll talk to an employer. I'll explain why this person's a good risk for their work site. And so it's a concerted effort that we want people to reintegrate, and we're going to help them any way we can. But again, the important point is I expect the resident to be the hardest worker in that regard. I don't want to infantilize them. I don't want to give them excuses. It's up to them whether they want to succeed, and we will help them succeed if they want to succeed. Next slide. Okay, all right. So our rental rates are the first point's sort of relevant. It's always below market. So if someone, again, I mentioned if they're on ODSP or OW, that we'll take that as full rent. If they're working, we try to gear a rent to income, but it's always below market. I think our highest rent right now is paid by Colin because he's working. And so it's I think it's $700 a month. $700 a month. Okay, it's a great deal. He has the biggest room of any house we have. So I do that on purpose. I want the guy who is working, doing really well to get the best room if it's available. And just as an example to others, and Colin is a great example, which you'll hear about later. So we sign what are called head leases with the landlords. So what that means is I'll approach a landlord, they'll sign the lease with RJHO, and we will pay all the payments, all the utilities directly with the landlord or to the utility provider. And then it's our job then to collect whatever rent we can from our own residents. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the charity covers the difference between what we collect and what we pay. So here's a good example. If we have 4 men in a house collecting ODSP, that's $582. It's about $2,400 a month, a little bit less, obviously. And let's say our rent is $3,400. That's $1,000 difference. And let's say with utilities, another $200. That's $1,200 difference that we would cover. But if you think about it, we're providing safe housing for someone to reintegrate back to society for about $300 or so per resident, which is a great deal. Particularly the government's not paying it, so it's our donors paying it. So it's a great deal for society that we're doing that load for relatively a small amount of money. Certainly comparatively to other programs would cost much more, a much greater outlay of cash. So for about $300 by repurposing a house that's already being rented on the market for this social good, you can see how many positives you can get from a relatively small amount of money. So the last point, housing access. So when someone comes here, we want to help them transition. That's our ultimate goal. So for our women's house, the last resident, we actually ended up paying their first and last month's rent to their new location. They were going to moving out of the city of Toronto. They wanted to move out of that. So we paid first and last. We paid for the transit of the moving expenses. So we want them to succeed, and we're not going to let money be the reason why they're not succeeding. One of my favorite residents, our third resident ever, he came to us through a referral from Yonge Street Mission, and he had been homeless for a number of years, long criminal record, drug issues, etc. He had been living in a storage locker for almost a year, an industrial storage locker. He rented it or someone rented it for him. He would sneak in at night, live there, and come out during the day. So he came to us, and we moved him into one of our houses. And you can imagine he was very difficult. He was set in his ways after all this period of homelessness. He was loud when other people were sleeping. He was sleeping when other people were going about. It caused a lot of issues. But I knew he was trying. He just couldn't help the issues he was creating. So what we ended up doing, we had a relationship with a property manager nearby. We transferred him to his own bachelor unit, and I worked with his caseworker at OW, and so at ODSP, and we ended up having his ODSP housing allowance plus his Canada Ontario housing benefit paid directly to the landlord, and then the resident only had to come up with about $200 more a month, and I guaranteed the lease. Now, I'm sure RJHO would have covered it if he had defaulted on the lease, but he never did. So this person with a crazy long criminal record and other issues of homelessness, he did not miss a single payment the first year. The landlord then let me out of the lease guarantee. And this is now 3 years later. I talked to him yesterday, if I could tell this story. He has been crime-free and employed part-time and has paid his rent every month. So that's a story that if you knew him, and he was well-known in the social services sector, to where he was to where he is, and the incredible change in his life because of stable housing and the responsibility that he had to maintain it. So we didn't just give him housing. He had to come up with a few $100s a month. And he knew I was on the hook personally if he defaulted. And he'd said, Joseph, don't worry, I'm not going to stick you with the bill. And he kept his word, which is a great thing. So that's what we try to do. We take a person individually, what the situation is, and we're trying to help them move on to a better place eventually. Next slide, please.
That's great. Joseph, can I stop you for 1 second? And just a question on that too. And you're talking about sort of how it works. It's your RJHO is on the hook. How does this work with the Residential Tenancies Act? How do you ensure procedural fairness for tenants? And is there sort of like an occupancy agreement that sets out rights and responsibilities?
All right, I'll hit those as I can remember them one at a time. So we operate under an exemption of the Residential Tenancies Act. It's Section 5, transitional housing. So the benefit of that is that, yes, we provide our services of transitional housing, but if there's any issues, the resident cannot appeal to the landlord and tenant tribunal. They must appeal to a panel that we set up, which are usually members of our advisory committee or our board of directors, but these people have had no involvement whatsoever in the decision, let's say, to evict someone or move to another house. So it's completely impartial. And that hearing usually involves a discussion of what the issue was. The resident says their side. I'm there as sort of a confirmer of facts or the story. Even times where I've been the person that decided that someone should be evicted, I end up arguing on their behalf. I can't help but not. I give them good arguments. I'll whisper arguments. I'll write them down so they read them. So I'm trying to get them to succeed. So even when that we have to evict somebody, they know they've been given a fair shake, and it's because of choices they made. So that's how we try to keep it very fair. We are reluctant, I can tell you, very reluctant to evict someone. And almost every time they have an appeal hearing of an eviction, they're given another chance. They're given come back, say, you can come back if you go to drug rehab, or you can come back if you do X, Y, Z. We don't want to put someone homeless, and we try to make sure they have a place to go if we have to end up to that situation where they have to move on for whatever reason.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, let's move to the next slide.
Okay, so again, as mentioned earlier, it is a very cost-effective model. We are trying to promote independent living for our residents while addressing the reality that many of them experience some degree of mental health, substance abuse, and health issues. I note the word all, because even our most highest functioning residents, if you only met them for half an hour, you would say, I can't understand why this person ever had any issues. But if you spend enough time with them and you interact with them enough, you realize there's always some reason as to what led to their incarceration or led them to us not be able to find their own place to live on their independently. There's always something, and I think if you spend enough time in prison, you do develop certain baggage mentally that affects you in a negative way when you're trying to get back into society. I think Colin might be the only exemption of that, of the having baggage. Maybe he'll tell me otherwise, but it is something you know. And once I came to realize that, I approach every resident with that in mind, and I'm always sensitive to that, particularly if there's any abuse issues, substance abuse issues. I'm always thinking about that. So we try to also, as alluded to earlier, connect them with comprehensive support services. So again, detox and substance abuse, beyond even AA and NA direction, we've offered to pay for treatment for residents if that's the case. We're a women's house. There's been intimate partner violence counseling, mental health counseling. We have a relationship with Gerstein Crisis Center, so that if we have an issue with one of our residents, a mental health issue, they will send their crisis bus to our location if that's needed. Primary health care. We have a member of our board of directors works at Inner City Health, so we can direct a new resident when they come here. They need a primary care physician. We can direct them there to get care immediately. And complex health care. That's an important point. If you know anyone who's gone to prison, their health is generally worse than the average person of that age. And that relates to the lifestyle perhaps before prison, the lifestyle in prison. It can be very stressful, the food poor, the medical care in prison very poor. So we probably have a disproportionate amount of residents who develop cancer or other major health issues. And if that occurs, of course, we try to get them medical care, but we also ensure they go to appointments. We'll drive them to appointments. That's probably the number one role of our volunteers is, can you please drive a resident to their appointment at St. Joseph's, a cancer treatment, et cetera. And that's very valuable. And so that's one thing we provide. Successful transitions. It's a very broad definition, but one where residents transition successfully back in the community, reconnect with families, obtain employment, learn a trade, and develop new career paths as they leave their lives of crime behind them. So I would argue, if you look at our recidivism rate of our residents, it is comparatively lower than I think any other group doing what we do. I would argue that, and I could probably prove it. And one of it's probably screening who we choose to bring in. But I think it's also very important, the motivation I try to give them and the responsibility. I always tell the guys, look, you're responsible for your life. I want you to do well, but I want you to do well really because I want RJHO to still exist 5 years from now. So if you do a great job, it's more likely that we'll be here for another future formerly incarcerated person who just wants that second chance. And so one of the individuals who has done well and done well for RJHO representing himself, it's the person beside me, Colin. He's a longtime resident of this house. But before I introduce Colin, I'll quickly tell you a story how I met him. So the process of screening, he's interviewed by someone on our assessment committee. And if he gets past that stage, usually the last step is meeting me. And I try to meet them at one of our houses so that other residents in the house can see them interact, maybe give me some inside information about this person if they know them from prison. So Colin came to the door of one of our houses. I opened it up and I saw he was wearing this gorgeous Sunday suit with a beautiful black felt hat. And in his hand, he had his resume and all his certificates from inside prison and afterwards. And he came in, he laid out all his paperwork on the table in front of him. And and he's getting ready to answer my questions as well as he could. And I looked at him, I said, Colin, you are by far the best dressed applicant I've ever had for one of our rooms. And you might be the best dressed man I've ever seen. I'm not even asking any questions. You're in. And so Colin was in just on that point, and he has lived up to the expectations of his wardrobe. He's been a great resident. Hopefully he'll tell us about his volunteer work in the community and everything else. I've intentionally not asked Colin what he's going to speak about. I have faith in him, and I didn't want to guide him in any way. And I actually want to learn more about Colin. So I'll turn it over to you, Colin. Please tell us your story.
Hi. I came to know RJHO by way of John Howard. I was at the halfway house at Salvation Army on Jarvis, and I got here, and but before I got to housing, when I left prison, when I was in there, well, first of all, while I was in there, I found a kind of peace, a kind of freedom from materialism and some of the things that I was like trying to identify with. I found a freedom from those things, and in that I kind of developed a plan, because I know that after I leave prison, I have to have short-term, long-term plan. One of my short-term plans, excuse me, was housing. And I left there, and well, I kind of CPR'd my life while I was in prison, which is, you know, I looked at consequences, I look at personal standards, how you see me, how I want to be seen, and I look at consequences, because that was part of what got me into prison, with risky thinking followed by risky behavior, and not having the benefit of a mentor that would redirect me like Joseph at the time. But now I do.
That's good.
So I decided that I was going to reintegrate back into the community in a way that where I have to prove myself, because it was not just giving back. I was at a point where I have to show that I can be dependable and I can be reliable. My past is not my prologue. It's a situation I got into, and well, I made bad choices, plain and simple. And I started to volunteer. I made some inquiries. I asked around, I walked around, I made phone calls, and I was sort of interested in the volunteer aspects of it. So I went to St. Vincent, St. Stephen's, 260 Augusta, and I made an application, and they took me there. And I spent about 13 months there. Some weeks I worked at least 40 hours, maybe 50, 60 hours some weeks, just volunteering, because I needed to have them see that I can be dependable and reliable. And I know from there I could move on to possibly securing some kind of employment with St. Stephen's. And I did, because I think dependability and reliability were the two main factors at the time they were looking at. And I got a small contract for 4 hours a week. That was sort of a probationary kind of thing to see how well I do, that I don't call in sick a lot, or I don't come in late, or when I'm there, I'm doing my job. I think they wanted to see those things in me, given my history and my past. And I think I passed that with flying colors. And I was eventually given another contract to work at the shelter. That came to an end, and now I've been given another contract. I work at the hospital. I work at Toronto General and Toronto Western. I alternate between the two by way of TNG, the neighborhood group. And I deal a lot with, well, it's about lived experience. People just like me who have substance abuse. I don't think I mentioned that, but I have a history of substance abuse. I've been clean for quite a while. Well, I say quite a while. 11 years. And with the job I have, I resource people. I try to provide, as Joseph was mentioning, ID clinics or housing, or where we try to get them a bed in the, when it's very cold outside, or we try to get them into detox and, provide them with a list of possible places they can apply for housing, that sort of thing. And I think the most important thing most people that come there look forward to is conversation. They want to talk. We try to meet people where they are, and we try to use curiosity and non-judgmental type of approach, which is it was not hard for me to do, because when I was out there using and I thought I was being misunderstood, that's what I wanted. I wanted kindness and caring and compassionate and understanding. And it's a time, getting really emotional here. There's a time, I couldn't love myself. And when I see the people that come in, that's what they're looking for. They just want somebody to care about them. Because in that moment, when I was there, I had no ability to love myself. And they look to me to provide that kindness and caring and compassion and understanding, because they're not there yet. And that's what I do. And that gives me a great deal of satisfaction in giving back to society. And it also enriches me in, like, it gives me different perspectives on life. I have a better understanding of, you see, before my incarceration, I was very judgmental, and I never thought for a minute to take a minute to understand what a person is going through. And that was a big eye-opener for me, to sit and to engage and to be curious about their situation, as I would have hoped a lot of employers, rather landlords, would do when speaking to us that have criminal records, because we're not what we did. I mean, I'm not. The situation I was in was because of risky thinking and risky behavior and ego. And sometimes I know I lost all of that in prison. I became very humble when I got out. I even did a lot of, I volunteered to clean a toilet at, was it A&W? A&W. And they had no cleaning supplies, because I did not understand humility. And I wanted to understand humility. And I went over and I bought the cleaning supplies, about $15, and I cleaned the toilet. And the idea was to do something for that benefits someone, without them knowing me, without me knowing them, and without getting the pats on the back that I was so accustomed to. And, that gave me a lot of satisfaction. So in doing those things, I've gotten to a place where it's very easy for me to help other people. I think helping other people sometimes to me is just listening to them. And I'm in a position, because I work with St. Stephen's, with the neighborhood group. We have resources that I could direct them to, that they sometimes are at a loss. That sometimes a bed is such a big deal to some people. They're so happy and elated that we can provide that. Please provide the information or make the phone calls, because I do make the phone calls on their behalf with their permission. And yeah, I get a great deal of satisfaction from that. I mean, there's so much I could say about my experience since I've been in RJHO. And one of the benefits, I got to say, of RJHO is, I mean, even when I came out, I had these ideas that I was going to, I was a little vengeful. And I wanted to get even with a few people. But I talked to Joseph, and he told me and showed me and pointed out the negative, the downfall, where I could end up, the fact that I could go right back in there. So it wasn't just about housing coming here. I got some good counseling. I mean, that is one of the things that RJHO, I am grateful for, is that have I not allowed myself to receive that information, I probably would have been back in there. So it's not just housing. They do so much more for us. I mean, Joseph is the kind of guy, or any one of the members, you can talk to about any issue, and he will, lend his vast experience that I don't have. And, because I'm open to new information, I understand, I see things, perspectives is very important for me now. Yeah, that's in a nutshell who I am, what I am, and where I am. It's about where I was, what I did about it, and where I am today. And this is where I am today.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Colin, and Joseph for sharing the information about RJHO. It's been really great. I have a bunch more questions, and then we'll open it up to the participants here as well. Before I move on, Colin, you talked a little bit about compassion and just recognizing sort of where people are at. What advice would you have for folks that are supporting people as they're trying to find housing, or if they're in housing programs for people that are rebuilding their life after incarceration?
I think we need to, as I do, I listen to them. I approach the situation with a great deal of curiosity, because sometimes what they tell me is not the whole story. So patience is required. I think just engaging with them and getting a better understanding of who they are and in what direction they want to go in, or if maybe they need some advice or help, or I could point them in the direction of where they could get that help if it's beyond my abilities. I don't know if
Thank
I
you.
answered the question.
It does. It does. Absolutely. I feel like, patience is a big one. This is next on the slide.
All right. So
Was that, do you
that's
want to
fine.
go, do you
That's
want to
fine.
take it away?
Sure, we'll take it from there unless you have more questions for Colin, or we can jump in after that for Colin again.
Yeah, we can keep going. Why don't we can go on with this slide, and then we'll jump back in. I do have more questions, so I'll jump back in
I'd like to get some
afterwards.
more compliments from Colin. I didn't know that was coming, that story. I didn't know I had that much of an impact on you. So I'm very happy about to hear that. So this is my own story, which I think is significant only because I think it reflects well in RJHO. It was a group started to help formerly incarcerated people find housing and stable housing to improve their lives after that. And it's significant that the first person they hired was a formerly incarcerated person, me. And that is actually me in my cell in Kingston Penitentiary. After the prison closed, they were giving tours of the prison. So I said, well, I'll go to the tour. So I'm on the tour, and the tour guides of the prison were former correctional officers. So the tour guide is going around saying, who knows what this is? Who knows what that is? Or where is this located? And I kept answering the questions correctly. And at one point, the tour guide correctional officer said to me, he goes, how do you know that answer? And I responded with honestly, well, I did time here a few years ago. And he goes, you did time here? You were a guard? And I said, no, I did time here. I was an inmate, and this cell over there, number 9, that's my cell. And if you go inside, you look at the top bunk, you'll see some etching and my name, Joseph was here, just like the movies. Everyone writes Joseph was here, whatever name is, Colin was here. So he went in there, he saw that, and he goes, wow. And he was taken aback by that. And as we're leaving the tour, he must have told all the other guards, and they all lined up to shake my hand on the way out to welcome me back to society. Now I'm getting emotional. So they all welcomed me back to society. It was very moving. And in the vernacular of prison, I don't want to get emotional. It's called shaking it rough. So I don't want to shake it rough. So let's go to the next slide, please, if you can. So I guess my start with RJHO began in Kingston Penitentiary on this range here with a promise. So I had come into this prison during its last months of operation. When it was there, it was Canada's oldest operating prison. It was well over 100 years old. And because they were closing it, the administration wasn't putting any money into its upkeep. So it was dirty. The windows on the right side, many of them were broken. Guys would stick their extra t-shirts into the holes to stop the wind and the snow from blowing in. I was there in January and February. We had a washer and dryer to do our clothes. The washer was broken, so we had to clean our clothes in our sinks with a bar of soap, old style, rubbing it with water. The dryer did work, but because it was so cold, the last guy who was out, his job was to run over to the dryer, turn it on, and pull off the exhaust vent and drop it on the floor and go back into his cell before they locked him out. So they would blow warm air for about an hour. At night, you'd sleep with all your clothes on. I slept with my boots, my jacket on because it was so cold. We had one television with 30 guys in this range, 15 on top, 15 on the bottom. We had one television. It was 11-inch black and white. And because no one's going to bring batteries into the prison, no one cares if guys can watch TV or not. What they did was the inmates had stuck popsicle sticks into holes they made in this little television, and they ran strings back to, I think, cell number 8. And he would pull the string up and down to change the channels, and then 2 more strings up and down to change the volume. And so in short, it was the roughest prison. I had like 3rd world quality, roughest place I've ever been in. And I was there long enough that the guards made me the cleaner. Now, the cleaner, as the name implies, is you clean the range, you mop it up, you clean the toilets, you clean the shower. And the reason you do that job is that you'll be out of yourself for about 12 hours a day to do these tasks, hand out the food, because otherwise, at that time, we were locked up 23 hours and 40 minutes a day. You get yard time sometimes every day, sometimes every second day, but if there was no yard time for whatever reason, you were locked up 23 hours and 40 minutes a day. The other 20 minutes were for shower time and phone call time. So I take this job because I have 2 small children at home, and I want to be able to access the phone either before school or after they come back from school. Otherwise, I would never know when my cell would be open up for shower time, so I can run to the phone and make a phone call. So I'm doing this job, and I'm handing out the food trays to the guys, and it's very boring in prison. So one of the activities is it's called busting balls. So they'll bust balls with me back and forth as I'm doing it, razzing me. And at one point, one of the inmates in cell number 5, a young guy, big guy, his name was Frankie. And Frankie started busting my balls, but in a way that crossed the line. He implied to everyone that I was a pedophile, which I was not. But that's not a reputation you want to have in a maximum security prison. So I pushed back against his assertion about that. And I crossed the line. I can't remember what I said, but I crossed the line into him. And then loud enough for all 30 guys to hear, Frankie shouted out, "When my cell gets cracked open," and cracked open means open for shower time. He said, "When my cell gets cracked open, I'm coming over to yours and I'm going to effing kill you." Now, he didn't say effing, as you can guess, but so because of who he was and where we were and how he said it intentionally loud enough for everyone to hear, everyone knew Frankie was now obligated to try to kill me. So I went back to my cell, which is the only one that's unlocked. And I was not religious in any way, but I started praying to a higher power. And at a certain point in time, it turned from a prayer to a negotiation. And I remember saying either out loud with my voice or in my head so loud it became reality that if you help me get through this back to my children, I'm going to take some good from the bad of my life entirely to help other people. And as soon as I said that, either out my mouth or in my head, focused on it, as soon as I said it, I heard a loud explosion of metal I had never heard in this prison before. A boom, and then another explosion of metal, boom, and then feet started stomping towards my cell. And I thought to myself, naturally, well, Frankie's cell's been opened up. He's got some boys that are coming to my cell to do their best. So I got ready. I probably wasn't going to win this fight because nothing good was going to happen. I was either going to win some miraculous way and get more prison time and delay my return to my children, or I'm going to be killed or maimed. So I got ready, and all of a sudden, this large arm reaches out and grabs the side of my cage door and pulls it shut, and it locks. And then 2, 3, 4 correctional officers run past my cage, and they run down the hall of the range. So I catch my breath. I push my face against the bars to look down what's going on because I don't know what's going on. And I see 2 officers with a stretcher, and they're in my view, and they go out of my view. And then a few moments later, they come back in my view. And on the stretcher is Frankie having an epileptic seizure, flailing around. The guy that was going to kill me has a seizure, and they take him away. I never see him again. Shortly thereafter that, I have a parole suspension hearing, and I was told by the prison chaplain I was only the 2nd person in 5 years to win one of these. And shortly after that, with the help of a parole officer in Kingston Pen, I was back in a park in Toronto with my children. Now, that is a true story. It was either divine intervention, power of positive thinking, or incredible coincidence. But whatever it was, I have to be honest that it happened immediately after I made a promise to help other people with my experience. And ever since that day, when I found out about RJHO, I put myself forward as a program director for them because I thought this would help me keep my promise. And ever since that day that I work with the residents like Colin and others, I feel that I'm keeping my word that I made that day when I need help the most. And for helping me today, in helping me keep the promise today, and speaking to you and answering all your questions that you'll have, I'm sure, I want to thank you very much. So thank you, Sophia.
Thank you so much. Wow, I'm going to stop sharing here and just allow us to have a bit more of a conversation. Really impactful story. Both of you, really appreciate you sharing. And I wanted to ask you, Joseph, just as building off of your story, You mentioned that this organization is built off people with experience. And can you talk a little bit about the importance of that? You know, even it's not necessarily built off the idea, I don't know if it is the idea of a peer model or if it just happened to be people who have experience that sort of came together. But can you talk about the importance of having that experience and how that impacts the work that you do?
Yeah, so I think if I have any success in this job, it's because I understand the mindset of someone who's been to prison for any period of time. I know the vernacular that guys feel comfortable speaking with. So when I meet them, I will talk prison lingo because they go, wow, this is so different from a social worker that I normally interact with. I'll swear occasionally. So they feel comfortable. We're almost on the same level that way. And I want them to look at me at the same level. I'm there to help them. They can approach me, call me anytime. I get calls at all hours, 7 days a week. Because they, rather than maybe their natural inclination might do something negative if they're having a dispute in the house, but they say, well, you know what? I'll call Joseph first, or I'll text him first. He'll know what to do. And that's so because of my experience, I think I'm successful. So if any other groups that want to help formerly incarcerated people, I think you should try to bias in hiring with people who've been to prison. It's not at one level, I think it sets an example, which is great, like RJHO did, leading by example. But two, I think someone who has been inside is just naturally more effective at the job than someone who hasn't been. And hopefully that's what I'm showing with what I do in this job every day.
Thank you for that. One of the things that we often talk about in our work, we know that there's so many people coming out of incarceration or that have those experiences aren't a monolith. There's so many different needs and experiences that people might have. And so there's a need for different types of housing. And you noted there's some eligibility sort of limitations here for RJHO. RJHO, yeah, sorry, I got the acronym right.
Terrible acronym. I know it should be
yeah,
short.
no worries. So I'd say, who would you say is best served by this model that RJHO has?
Yeah, so if I look at the type of residents we've had over the years, the average resident is probably, again, for the Houses for Men, it's a man about 55 years of age. And if you thought about it logically, it makes sense because they've done at least 10 years inside prison, either intermittently added up 10 years or consecutively. And if it makes sense because they're old enough that, maybe they've burned all the bridges of family and friends, or they've family and friend have passed away because they've been away so long, but they're not old enough to get, say, Canada Pension Plan or OAS, so they don't have the money to get their own place. So that's the kind of typical resident, and they have to be autonomous in the sense they can take care of themselves, cook for themselves, clean for themselves. Because I am the only employee, so I'm running between houses, et cetera. There's no live-in staff, so they have to be self-monitoring. I tend to make, let's say, a senior person in the house, usually a lifer. I call him my trustee, where that person's my eyes in the house. If there's a problem, they're sensing any issues, they'll let me know so that I can get there quickly to resolve things. So the person we have, a typical resident, has to be able to take care of themselves and just need the support of stable, safe housing and maybe direction in the right way, or encouragement not to make mistakes that brought them to us if some of the setbacks. I did not know, Colin. I know, I talked to you in the past about issues you had, but I did not know you took that story, took that from me, our conversation. So
yeah, that's why I'm still here.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I did not know that you were that close to screwing up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad. Did I yell when I did that?
No,
Oh, okay.
You just laid out the facts.
Okay, I do lay out the facts. I tell guys if they're on parole what to expect, when to expect it, and what the benefits of staying on parole, staying right, and the negatives of going off track. And I think that's important to just be very honest with them.
We're all learning something here, aren't we? Can you talk about your experience working with landlords? And you talked a little bit about how it started, but for others' information, and what role you think landlords should play in sort of this, alleviating housing insecurity for formerly incarcerated people.
So I'll tell you, when I go to community events or I go to social services or collectives, get-togethers, this couldn't come across as criticism, but I think it's true. I am struck by the negative view of landlords. My approach is I need the help of a landlord. So I am going to put myself in the shoes of the landlord and say, what do I want from a tenant? So when I approach a landlord, I try to meet their needs from their perspective. I say, you don't have to worry about rent or utilities. RJHO will cover all of those. You don't have to worry about damage to your house. If there's an issue, we're going to fix it out of our own pocket. You don't have to worry about that. And if for whatever reason you don't like the relationship, it's not working for you, you tell us, you give us 60 days. We're not going to cause you a hassle. We're not going to go to tribunal. We will move willingly without issues. And again, it goes back to my goal of making a formerly incarcerated person a good tenant or look better than the average tenant, because you have to overcome the hurdle of a criminal record. The average person, their natural inclination is to avoid someone with a criminal record, if at all possible. Two people, criminal record, no criminal record, I'll take the no criminal record. And in our case, I'm trying to sell a rental to us where I'm going to say there's going to be 4 or 5 or 6 people in your house, 1 per bedroom, that have a criminal record. That's not an easy sell. So I have to meet them where they stand, and I go in their shoes, and I try to alleviate any concerns they have. So that's the approach I would say. Put yourself in the shoes of a landlord and try to give them what they want, and they'll be more inclined. In our case, our first landlord is resulting in the second and third. So by doing that for our first landlord, that led to now 4 houses for men. And in our 5th house, I'm sure there'll be some involvement with our existing landlords helping us get our 5th house. So that's it. That's the advice I would give. Put yourself in the shoes of the landlord and try to meet their needs first.
Absolutely. And do you do outreach with the neighbors? Is there sort of a concerted plan to tell neighbors this is what this housing is, or do you not do that?
Oh, so NIMBYism, you're saying. How do you deal with NIMBY? Well, that was a big debate when we started, and we decided it's better to ask forgiveness than ask for permission to overcome NIMBYism, so to say. So what we did, we decided we just opened the house, and we told the guys, it's very important. You got to be the best neighbor on the street. You got to volunteer, take out the neighbor's trash, shovel their driveway, cut their grass, whatever it takes, so that when we are eventually discovered, if we're discovered, the neighbor who knows, yeah, there's people with criminal records here, but they're a great tenant. Or eventually, usually after about a year, we'll go to the nearest police division where our house is located, and we'll introduce ourselves. And the last time I did it, it was in Scarborough. I went to the police division and I met their community policing department. And I said, look, we have a house here. There's 5 people living there, et cetera. And they said, you must be doing a great job because we've heard nothing about this. We know nothing about your house in the area. And that's a great thing to hear. And then after that, they go, clearly we must be doing something right, because it's a nice house and a nice street. No one complained about you. So clearly you're doing something right. So I'm not going to encourage people to just start, but there's no, in our case, we didn't show any downside just starting and then dealing with issues after they present themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about, I understand that it's sort of longer term, but still transitional housing that you provide. Can you talk a little bit about those timelines and how you prepare people for a transition out of your housing models?
Sure. Under the legislation, the maximum they could stay with us is 4 years. So that's always the hard end point. And we don't really talk about transition unless the person wants to, unless maybe after the first year, to get them to decompress, maybe save some money. So for example, I had a resident who used to live in this house in Colin's old room. And when I said to him, what's your goal after a year or 2 or 4 year goal? And he said, well, I want to save enough money so that I can get a place where my daughter in her school district, so she can live with me because her mother does drugs. I said, okay, that's a great goal. To get that goal, you're gonna have to work really hard and you have to save and sacrifice. And once you get to that point where you have enough money, let me work on the landlord, because I'm very good at this. I'm good selling it. So at that point, and this person worked 6 days a week. He took another job. The 7th day, he would cook all his food on one day and put it in Tupperware to save money. And after about a year, he came to me and said, I have enough money for our own place. Can you talk to this landlord? It's in my daughter's school district. I talked to him. I sold him hard. I said, he's a great resident. The landlord knew about his criminal record, but I said, look what he's done at this point when I give him an opportunity. And the landlord gave that resident that place to live. The daughter eventually moved in with him. And now this is almost 3 years later. The daughter is still living with him and she's starting high school in September. But for us, like, this person was very dedicated. So he might have achieved this goal somewhere else, but it certainly would take him much longer because our rent is so low that he was able to save a lot more money quickly. So I feel great about that success story of a family being brought together again, and a person who's been to prison being able to be judged now as a father as opposed to as a prisoner.
Absolutely. And I know there's some Q&As building up, so I'll get to them in just a minute, but I want to ask you what advice or lessons learned you have from operating this program now and seeing it grow, that you would want to give to somebody else that might be designing or thinking of introducing a similar program elsewhere.
So I say the number one thing is honesty. So you have to be honest about who you want to serve and the baggage they come with, and all the negatives and positives that they might have. And I think you have to be honest about who you can serve. You cannot be all things to all people. Now, like I've said to some members of our board, it feels great to take a person from homelessness to housing, but it's not fair to our existing residents if they're doing well. If I put someone in their house that's going to disrupt it or maybe jeopardize their safety, I don't want the good feeling that I might get giving someone a place to live to be paid by our existing residents. It's not fair. So you have to decide who you want to serve and know the limits of who you can serve, and then gear your program to that. So if you wanted to have very high risk people, well, you can't have someone not living in the house at full time, like doing my job. If you want to do what we do, which is people just need a second chance, maybe a little push, maybe some good advice once in a while and some yelling once in a while to keep them straight, then our model is probably best. And so stay within the parameters of what you can do is probably the advice I would give.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Okay, let's go to a couple of the Q&As that are coming in. So the first question, and I think you kind of covered this, but it was whether folks coming out of provincial institutions can also apply, or if it's just federal. So I think you mentioned it's both, right?
It is the only criteria we have is some prison or jail experience. They've gone through the system. They need us. So I always tell the guys, I said, the rest of the world is going to discriminate against you because you've been to prison. I'm going to discriminate in favor of you because you've been to prison, which they always take them back. It's the first time it's ever happened to them where it's a positive. So I remember we were screening for volunteers, and the board says, well, we need to do criminal background checks of our volunteers. And I said, I hope you're looking for people with criminal records, because that's a good thing, not to eliminate them. With a criminal record, they're probably the best volunteers you can get because they understand, they can interact, they can share stories with the residents, and the residents will be more comfortable to share them than someone else who's a square, as we say, in prison.
Absolutely. And another question is about the expected waiting time for applicants to be housed once they apply. Do you have a waiting list? How long is that typically?
So we have a waiting list. It's not seniority based. So my goal is when we have someone, I could interview someone today, and I think he's a great candidate who could, number one, benefit, and maybe he's a good fit for where a vacancy presents itself. We're always full, but when a vacancy presents itself, we'll go back to our waiting list and we'll say, who's the best fit on this list for this house? So how long they would wait, it depends on the resident and when the vacancy is open. So if we open another house this year, that means there'll be like 4 or 5 rooms in one shot. So then I can go through the waiting list and I can interview people again or see what they're available. And I'll try to take the best 5 for that house. And if I open a new house, I always like the first resident to be a lifer, someone who's been to prison a long time, because they do well with a respect-based model. They understand how important respect is. So I feel more comfortable leaving them as the first resident of a house because they might set the tone for the rest of the house.
Thank you for that. There's a question about whether individuals can apply while they're still in custody or if they have to be released first.
They can apply if they're still, so you mean if they're in prison, applying from prison?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
think that's
we
the
often get
question.
we often get letters from prison or the jail, like Toronto South. This house is located relatively close to Toronto South. So we'll get letters or sometimes calls from jail or prison where someone will tell their story, and I'll say, okay, well, I can't guarantee you a place. I'd like to meet you. Maybe when you get out to a halfway house or get on the street, reach out to me. Here's my personal phone number. You call me, I'll do a quick interview, and we'll see what we can do when you get out. So it's not a hindrance. Again, from my perspective, I want the person who put their life of crime behind them, not just to say whatever it takes to get out of prison. But if they get out, I'll give them a fair shake, even starting the process in prison.
Okay, great. And then there's a question about whether this is open to people who are coming from custody or if other people who have justice involvement. So as you noted, the one criteria is that you've had some experience in jail or prison of some kind. The next question talks about, well, first it says, Joseph, the work you're doing is amazing. Do you have a how-to training for others looking to start something similar, i.e. some specifics on how you overcame barriers, made connections, etc.? And you talked about some of those trade secrets in this call, but do you do a
start a
how-to?
house, you give me a call, I'll help you succeed. I'll give you all the secrets, all the inside information, whatever it takes to make you. I don't want you failing because you don't know something that I know. So if someone's sincere about starting a house anywhere in Canada, I will come and visit you and I'll help you succeed.
That's great. That's a big offer.
It's true. It's true.
There's a question about whether there are any other free training employment programs for people in a variety of work areas for those who may have limited education other than the one apprenticeship program that you mentioned. So I think they're referring to Building Up, and if there's others that you know of.
I don't know of others. I found employment for people. If we had employers contact us saying, look, I want to give an ex-prisoner a chance at a job. Do you have anybody? And I've referred people that have worked for years to this. So that's what I'll do. The reason that trades is probably perfect for people who've been to prison is they don't discriminate on a construction site against someone who's been to prison. It probably a disproportionate amount of the workers have been to prison because If you've been to prison, you know how hard it is to get back in society, how hard it is for an employer to give you a shake. And if you find a sector that doesn't discriminate, like construction, you're going to be drawn to that. So the trades program is perfect. So they're accepted on what they do, not on what they did.
Great. And this next question, and this was one of the questions I was going to ask, but then we went to the Q&As, was about funding. So could you talk a little bit about where RJHO gets its funding from? And the question goes, curious as to where RJHO gets its funding from to provide the difference in market rent, and would love to see this model replicated. And so maybe you'll go through that, and then there's another question after that I'll ask.
So when we started, I'll assume the initial board members put in their own money out of their pocket to start the process of renting the first house. We are entirely donor financed, so it might be small donors, large donors. We've had some foundational donors in the last few years that help us. So what we do is, let's say the burn rate between what we collect from residents and what we have to pay to our landlord, plus utilities, is say $1,500 a month. And that's $18,000 a year. Let's say, because we commit to 4 years to a resident. So that's $72,000. I think we typically like to have somewhat close to that amount in the bank before we open another house, because we'd hate to have a situation where we have to transition people out of the house because we can't afford the rent anymore. We can't afford the burn rate. So once we collect that much from various donations, then we say, okay, now we have stable funding, at least for a house. Let's go look for a house and let's see where the need for the house is. That's why we started in Scarborough. The 3 in Etobicoke, the next one was in Scarborough, because a lot of the ex-prisoners that I was dealing with said, do you have a house in Scarborough? I have family near Scarborough. I have a job near Scarborough. So that's why we have both sides of the city, which actually helps our residents, because we've had residents who had found a job. They live in Etobicoke, but found a job in Scarborough. So I've switched houses for them so they can be closer to work. So eventually we'd probably like to cover the city, each side and maybe one in the middle. And then if we expand outside of GTA, probably Brampton or Mississauga we'll be looking at.
That's great. And then the next 2 questions / comments are sort of about that lived experience piece. So I know you talked about that. Questions about whether you think it's critical to have folks with lived experience working with tenants and embedded in sort of social service positions. So I think maybe that's more than just working in your program, but do you think that lived experience is important for social service positions that work with folks that have experience of incarceration, it being more important than just having a stacked resume?
Yeah, well, the question I hate on job applications when I was looking for a job was, have you ever been convicted of an offense for which you've not received a pardon? This is a common question you get on all applications. And it struck me, this is a terrible question for someone who's been in prison, because either you say, if I tell the truth, I'm not getting this job, or if I lie, the foundation of this relationship is built on a lie, so that the employer will now think, not only am I a criminal, but I'm also a liar too. And that's actually something that guys who've been in prison, they don't want the extra stigma of being a liar. So they don't end up not getting the job. So I think groups working in this sector, if you're in any way assisting people who've been to prison or been homeless, etc., you should try to bias your hiring in favor of someone like that. Number one, if they have insights that you perhaps don't have. But number 2 is, I would argue they would probably work harder than an average person, because they're trying to set the tone and say, I'm representing other people who've been in prison, so I want this employer to think this is a good pool of applicants to choose from in the future also. That's how I did it. So I give all I have, because I'm trying to overcome what people might think, well, we're giving this ex-con a chance. Let's see how he works out. And I want to be better than they thought I would be. And I think a lot of guys who've been in prison, when they get a chance at a job, like Colin in his case, I think he wants to be better than the average employee in that same position.
And there's actually research to support that. There's a ton of research, especially coming out of the US, about hiring folks with criminal records, and finding that they actually have like lower turnover rate, more job loyalty, equal or lesser performance, equal or higher performance levels than folks without criminal records. And so there's a lot of data to actually support that.
It's common sense if you thought about it. Like, if you've been rejected and discriminated against for years, and someone gives you a chance, you're going to give your best shot, because you might go, there might not be another chance down the road. I've been waiting this long. Now I have my first chance in whatever year. There might not be another one. So I'm going to give it my best shot. So that rings true to me.
Absolutely. And this is maybe something you can provide an answer to in the comments, or we can share, but somebody's wondering if you can provide the contact details for the ID clinic you mentioned, Margaret.
Yeah, so I have certain caseworkers at Margaret's that I deal with, but you can check out margarets.ca, their website. It's a community group in Toronto, or Google it, margarets.ca, and they'll assist you in that area. They're fantastic.
Perfect. And this is sort of related to the piece we talked about with transition, but do you have continued wraparound supports after a tenant leaves to ensure their success, or is there any contact post exit from your housing?
That's probably me, because I built a relationship with all our guys. So when they move on, I'll socialize with them. I meet them on their birthdays oftentimes. I'm getting texts from them constantly, or calls occasionally how they're doing. So it's not a formal service. It's something I've entrusted in myself, because I want the person to do well. I don't want to hear a bad story a year or 2 years from now when they moved on. So maybe when Colin moves on, if he wants to talk to me and get yelled at about staying on the right path, I will yell at him anytime he wants. So that's what we do.
That's great. And if folks have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. The other question is, this is a question asking if you plan on moving this program outside of Toronto, but I also just wanted to open that up a little bit and ask about what you see for the future of RJHO.
Yeah, so what I envision is this model, has a level of success that it's reproduced throughout Canada, perhaps by community groups in different areas. Let's say a Rotary Club somewhere in Canada wants to start their own house. I tell them how to do it. I give them the model. I tell you the ins and outs, and they can start that in their community. Again, at the relatively low cost, if you think about providing houses per resident, and that might spread. So RJHO succeeding, it can be copied. We've proven the model in Toronto, at least. Maybe, and certainly it's probably easier to do it outside Toronto because rents are lower. So the burn rate would be lower between what you collect, the ODSP amount, let's say, and what you have to pay a landlord. So it'd probably be more successful in somewhere like St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, or somewhere farther north. So that's what I might envision, and I would hope it's copied by others, because it's hard, but it's not that hard. So you can do it if you have the will.
That's great. I'm just scanning the chat. I know there's a lot of comments just thanking you both for your stories, thanking you for sharing information about this program, and talking about how great it is to hear about the success of this. So I think I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. So we can probably wrap it up. Is there anything else that you wanted, to share with folks today? I can send it back to you for that. Otherwise, thank you so much. It's been great.
Sorry, I'll just say that I want to thank everyone who's been on this video call. You have an interest in this area, and I can tell you, when I started, not a lot of society cares about formerly incarcerated, regardless of they want to reform themselves or not. So anyone who's interested, I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
And I'm seeing another question in the chat about getting your contact information. So you might be, that offer to share more information and advise.
It's an easy email. It's Joseph, JOSEPH @rjho.ca. The RJHO is right behind me. So it's Joseph @rjho.ca. Send me an email. I'll talk to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph and Colin. We really appreciate your presentation today. It was really impactful, and the comments really reflect that. So thank you so much, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And I'll turn it back over to Trevor and folks if there's any other comments before we close.
Thank everyone for attending. I want to thank Sophia for moderating and asking some great questions and moderating the questions from the people attending. I want to thank Joseph and Colin for not only the presentation, but sharing your stories. They were very impactful. And I have to be honest in saying it had a great impact on me. Personally, for those who don't know, not only am I a person with lived experience of the mental health system, but also the correctional system myself from many, many years ago. But, my 6 months in the correctional system is part of the reason why I've spent the last 25 years with the HSJCC. And so it definitely had an impact on me hearing your stories. And I want to thank you for that. And thank you everyone for participating, for attending. And for those people who are asking, yes, the recording of this will be posted on YouTube shortly. So look for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good day.